Hello again, internet friends. Today I wanted to talk to you about why I think bodybuilding is functional and why exercise selection doesn't matter nearly as much as you think it does. The conversation we're about to have is inspired by the many arguments I've seen in comment sections underneath a training video of either a jiu-jitsu athlete or an MMA fighter doing some type of bodybuilding exercise as a part of their combat sport training. The conversation usually goes something like this. Somebody will comment, "Oh, why are they doing that exercise? That's not going to help with their sport." And then somebody will comment underneath, "Oh, well, actually, that helps with this, this, and this, blah, blah, blah." And then an argument ensues. And to help you answer that question and navigate yourself around the conversation about whether or not a exercise is functional or helpful for a specific sport or activity, we're going to be taking a look at one of my favorite combat athletes who does involve bodybuilding style movements into his training, former UFC heavyweight champ Brock Lesnar. And as we get into the details of a guy like Brock Lesnar's training, you're going to be able to hopefully start to see why exercise selection is important, but maybe not as important as you might think it is. For those of you who don't know because you're younger or maybe don't follow MMA, Brock Lesnar was the UFC heavyweight champion back in the earlier 2000s, around 2010, 2012, something like that. And he really made a big splash in the fight game because he came in with not really much martial arts training other than this really strong collegiate wrestling base. And he had come from the WWE, and so he brought a lot of his fame and notoriety from that into the UFC. But other than his really strong wrestling base and his strength and athleticism, he didn't really have any other martial arts skills. And yet he was able to come in and bulldoze a lot of guys who had years and years of fight experience on him. They were better at jiu-jitsu. They were technically better at kickboxing and that sort of thing. And yet he was able to use that one skill set and his strength and his athleticism to still beat those guys and become heavyweight champ. So to get to the point of the video, why do we see these athletes who by all standards are very functional because they're able to go and they're able to punch and to grapple and do all these different things? They're very strong, they're in shape, they're athletic. Every physical quality that you could want, they have. But why are they doing these bodybuilding exercises? Why are they doing these kind of weird CrossFit-y weightlifting type circuits that a lot of us in the fitness community kind of look at and mock? Because according to a lot of different science and things like that, these are not necessarily the most optimal way to train. And more importantly, does them training that way take away from their ability to be good at their sport? The first question, which is why are they training this way, I think has a pretty simple answer, which is up until very recently, these wrestlers, jiu-jitsu guys, MMA fighters, when they went in to lift, they were usually being informed by a personal trainer or coach who had a powerlifting or bodybuilding background. So when they said, "Hey, I want to get stronger," normally it was you're going to go in and you're going to do lat pull downs and you're going to do shoulder flies and you're going to do some back extensions, just kind of classic strength and bodybuilding exercises. Now that has changed a lot in recent years. You see guys doing box jumps and pushing sleds and squatting with full depth and things that we consider a little bit more functional, but that change has been fairly recent. And so I think a lot of the things we see where athletes of Brock Lesnar's caliber or even a Gordon Ryan, who is one of the best jiu-jitsu guys in the world, doing these bodybuilding movements is because that's been the tradition. And that's been what strength coaches have always fallen back on for years and years. And a lot of these sports, whether it's wrestling, jiu-jitsu, MMA, they have very strong traditions. And so when they bring in a guy, they're going to very often go with a more old school approach and change to something more optimal. Whatever you think more optimal is going to take time. And so we've kind of seen that in the past 10 or 20 years. There's been a shift in the strength and conditioning training of athletes and the focus of the training to what we might consider more functional exercises. Now, the second question, is this bad? Is this effective? Does it detract from their ability to do well at their sport? Well, that's a difficult question to answer, and there's not necessarily going to be one answer that is yes or no. It's going to depend a lot on the athlete. But to take our primary example, Brock Lesnar, Later in the video, you'll see right now he's doing like a conditioning circuit, which is a little bit more functional, probably going to be a little bit better for his sport. But later in the video, you'll see he does more of a traditional bodybuilding thing. He's using a Smith machine, he's using a rowing machine, he's doing lateral raises, all of the things that we traditionally associate with bodybuilding. Is that bad for Brock Lesnar to do or for any other combat athlete to do? I argue no. I think that the majority of the strength and the skill that Brock Lesnar has that he brings to the table, he has gotten from years and years of sports specific training, specifically in wrestling. Before Brock Lesnar went into the WWE and the UFC, he had a very strong collegiate wrestling background. I don't remember specifically what his accolades were, but he was at a very high level. And even then, he was big, he was jacked, and he was strong. So there's probably some genetics at play and maybe a little secret sauce as well, but we won't get into that. That's not the point of the video. The point is that the majority of the strength that he's built up, the conditioning that he's built up, is doing his sport, doing wrestling. And so when he comes into the gym to lift weights or condition, it doesn't really matter as much the exercises he's using as long as he's challenging himself and getting stronger in a way that's sustainable and isn't going to take away from his sport. And so when he gets on a Smith machine and does upright rows, is that like the most functional thing he could have done? Maybe not. But if he just goes in and cranks out reps with 135 pounds on an upright row, you can bet that when he goes into grapple with somebody, he's going to have strong shoulders, a strong grip, and strong arms. And that's going to play a huge factor because Brock Lesnar's style was to go and to grab guys, drag them to the ground, and beat them over the head. When Brock Lesnar does lateral raises, shoulder flies, that's not necessarily the most functional thing he could have done, but he's making his shoulders stronger and he's using a range of motion that he probably doesn't get into that much. So that kind of speaks to the fact that not only are these things good for strength and conditioning development, but they can also be good from a prehab perspective where we're strengthening the muscles in ranges of motion they don't normally get into, and that's going to help him be healthy in the long run. On top of that, you see him doing some back extensions. Earlier in the video, you saw him doing some trap bar deadlifts. So he's getting all these different parts of his body strong through different ranges of motion. And he's doing that on top of his sports-specific training where he's getting the skill, he's getting the strength, and he's getting the conditioning that's very specific and he needs to have to do his sport. So anything else he's doing and what he's doing now in this weightlifting circuit is just extra credit at this point. And as long as he's doing it in a way that's productive to where the muscles that he's working are actually getting stronger and he's not injuring himself and he's not subtracting too much from his ability to wrestle and train MMA, then it's only going to make him stronger going into the fight. So the next time you see a fighter or a jiu-jitsu guy doing something that's maybe not the most functional exercise for them, don't get butthurt and think, oh, they're training so stupid. No. They're getting all the training they need from their sports-specific practice. They're getting strength and conditioning and endurance from those things. And so for them to go and lift weights, even in a very suboptimal form, is still better than nothing. And in some cases, I think it can actually be beneficial because they're not doing something that's specific and going to carry over to their sport. It allows their body a way to get better and to continue to train and get stronger and in better shape, but in a way that's not going to push them closer to getting some type of overuse injury or just getting mentally stale from always doing the quote-unquote functional thing. Ultimately, is exercise selection important? Yes, absolutely. But when you're dealing with an athlete like Brock Lesnar, who is getting so much training and it's so intense and so high stress just from his sport alone, going into the weight room and lifting weights, you don't have to worry about as much what he's doing there because he's getting the majority, the vast majority of what he needs from just doing his sport. So ultimately, we're trying to hit a moving target. And whether we're talking about your fitness program, Brock Lesnar, or Usain Bolt, the training is always going to be different and it's going to be dictated by the goal of the athlete, the specific needs and preferences of the athlete. So keep that in mind the next time you watch one of the best jiu-jitsu athletes in the world do a bicep curl and you want to say, oh, well, that's not functional. Keep all the things we talked about in mind before you make that comment. In the next video, we're going to continue to expound on exercise selection and why it's important, but maybe not as important as you think. And we're going to talk about it in relation to your specific training, not some high-level athlete. So if you like this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, follow me on Instagram if you're not already. I post a little bit more regularly on there. Before I go, a big thank you and shout out to the sponsor of this episode, the Xi Jinping Aeronautical Institute. You may have actually seen one of their more recent innovations on the news as it passed over the United States. Unfortunately, due to some technical difficulties, it had to be taken down by the United States Air Force, but we're very optimistic for the future, and we thank them for their generous donation to the channel. That's it for me, guys. I will see you in the next video.